The park buzzed with life as Milena sat on a weathered cement bench, her legs crossed elegantly, her gaze wandering across the scene before her. Children laughed as they raced across the grass, couples strolled hand in hand, and an elderly man fed pigeons with the precision of a daily ritual. Milena didn't linger on any of them. Instead, she pulled out her phone, its sleek surface catching the soft sunlight, and started scrolling through an endless stream of reels. Her perfectly manicured fingers flicked the screen with practiced ease, but her attention flickered elsewhere. From the corner of her eye, she spotted a man. He looked to be in his late 30s, with a lean build and a ruggedness that spoke of discipline. He was performing push-ups with a calm intensity, the muscles in his arms flexing rhythmically. Milena's lips curved ever so slightly into a smile, not one of amusement, but of curiosity. Sliding her phone back into her purse, she rose from the bench. Her movements were deliberate, her every step imbued with a graceful self-assurance. Her heels clicked softly against the pavement as she walked past the man, her head held high, her perfume leaving a subtle trace in the air. The man paused mid-push-up and turned his head to watch her. His eyes followed her until she disappeared down the pathway, her figure framed by the late afternoon glow. Milena didn't leave immediately. Instead, she found a cluster of trees near the park's edge, their shadows deep and concealing. From her hidden perch, she watched as the man completed his workout, picked up a gym bag, and left the park. She waited a few moments before slipping out of her hiding spot, her heels now silenced by the soft earth as she trailed him. He walked with a purposeful stride, cutting through the bustling streets, unaware of the silent observer behind him. When he reached a modest brick house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, Milena stopped a few yards away, noting the address before disappearing into the growing dusk. Over the next few days, Milena became a fixture in the park. She timed her visits to coincide with his workouts, lingering in the background as he ran laps or lifted weights on the park's outdoor equipment. She took note of his habits, the way he always arrived just before sunset, the car he drove, and the time he usually returned home. She didn't approach him at first, content to let him notice her. She made a point of walking past him every day, her confidence unwavering, her presence impossible to ignore. It didn't take long for him to give in to his curiosity. One evening, as the amber light of the setting sun bathed the park in gold, he finally approached her. "Are you new here?" he asked, his voice warm and slightly cautious. Milena turned to face him, her expression serene yet inviting. "I am," she replied, her voice smooth. "I'm just getting familiar with the area. Looking for work, actually." The man smiled, a genuine expression that softened the sharp angles of his face. "I'm Harry," he said, offering his hand. "Milena," she replied, her handshake firm but lingering just long enough to hint at something more. Their conversation was light, their words dancing over neutral topics, but there was an undercurrent of something unspoken. Over the next week, their brief encounters evolved into longer conversations. Harry was attentive, kind, and increasingly eager to see Milena. One evening, Harry invited her to dinner. "There's a great Italian place nearby," he said. "Let me treat you." Milena accepted with a gracious smile, and they spent the evening in a cozy restaurant with low lighting and soft music. The meal was delicious, the wine even more so, and their laughter came easily. When the night grew late, Harry glanced at his watch and frowned. "It's too dark for you to go home alone," he said. "Why don't you stay at my place tonight?" Milena hesitated for a moment before nodding. "All right," she agreed, her smile teasing. They walked to his house together, the quiet streets adding an intimacy to their steps. Once inside, Harry poured them each a glass of wine. They talked for a while, but the space between them seemed to shrink with every passing moment. Harry's eyes lingered on Milena, his gaze filled with a mixture of admiration and desire. He reached out, his fingers brushing hers. "You're stunning. You know that?" Milena tilted her head, her lips parting slightly as she leaned closer. "And you're very charming," she whispered. He cupped her face gently, his thumb tracing her cheek. Their lips met in a kiss that was slow at first, building in intensity as their breaths mingled. Harry's hands slid to her waist, pulling her closer as the world outside the moment ceased to exist. The kiss deepened, Milena's fingers tangling in his hair as she pressed against him. Their movements became fluid, their chemistry undeniable. Harry led her to the bedroom, their bodies entwined as passion took over. The sunlight streamed through Milena's bedroom curtains, painting soft golden patterns across the floor. She stirred awake, her eyes fluttering open to the silence of the morning. The memories of last night surfaced. Harry's charming smile, the warmth of his hands, and the fleeting passion they had shared. Slipping out of bed, she stretched lazily before making her way to the door. As she stepped outside to collect her morning paper, the crisp air carried an eerie stillness. She unfolded the newspaper casually, but her eyes froze on the bold headline that screamed from the front page. "Local man found dead, suspected homicide." Her breath caught as she scanned the article, her gaze locking on the familiar name. Harry. The description of his home, his age, it was unmistakable. The paper trembled slightly in her hands as disbelief settled into her bones. Images of him laughing, alive and vibrant, flashed through her mind. How could this be? Milena turned abruptly, retreating into her house. She closed the door behind her, leaning against it as a wave of sorrow washed over her. She dropped the paper onto the counter, her fingers brushing against her temple as she tried to piece together the incomprehensible. Her vibrant world had suddenly dimmed. The city buzzed with a different energy, one that Milena had come to appreciate since leaving her past behind. The restaurant where she now worked as a manager was lively, with clinking cutlery, laughter, and the hum of conversation filling the air. Milena enjoyed the change. Managing the place gave her purpose and kept her mind occupied, though the shadows of her memories lingered in the corners of her thoughts. One afternoon, she was inspecting the dining area when a voice caught her attention. It wasn't the tone that startled her. It was the name. "I'm Harry. I'd like a cheeseburger," the man said, his words clear yet calm. Milena turned slowly, her gaze locking on the customer. Her steps were deliberate as she approached his table, brushing past her staff. "What would you like to have, mister?" she asked, her voice steady despite the flutter of unease that ran through her. The man glanced up at her, his sharp blue eyes meeting hers. "Just a cheeseburger. Harry's the name." She scribbled his order down, though it wasn't her role. Around her, the waitstaff exchanged confused glances. It wasn't every day their manager took orders. She didn't care. Something about this Harry intrigued her, though she couldn't pinpoint why. When Harry finished his meal, he approached the counter to pay. "Keep the change," he said, sliding a generous tip toward her. Before Milena could respond, a waiter stepped in. "Sir, she's not a waiter. She's our manager." Harry's expression shifted to mild embarrassment. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize," he said, looking directly at her. Milena offered a polite smile, dismissing his apology. "It's fine," she replied, her tone as composed as her posture, before walking away. The next day, Harry returned. This time, he requested to speak to her. Curious, Milena joined him at his table. Their conversation started simply, a discussion about the city, the restaurant, and Harry's preference for quiet places. Over time, their meetings became more frequent. Harry was different from the men she had known. He spoke with sincerity, his stories carrying a sense of groundedness. He revealed that his wife had passed away a year ago, and though he hadn't sought out companionship since, he felt drawn to Milena. Milena found herself opening up as well, though she kept certain truths buried. She didn't tell him about her past, her secrets, or the strange pull she felt toward him. She told herself it was nothing more than chemistry, but the connection felt deeper, inexplicably magnetic. One afternoon, they had lunch together at Harry's house, a modest yet cozy space that reflected his unpretentious nature. As they sat across from each other, he leaned closer, his hand brushing hers lightly. Milena hesitated for only a moment before leaning in and pressing her lips to his. Harry whispered against her mouth, "Milena, I love you." Her breath caught, and for the first time in years, she was unsure of what to say. She pulled back slightly, searching his eyes. "I love you too," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. His brow furrowed. "Is something wrong?" "No," she said quickly, her tone firm. "I'm just not feeling well. I should go." She left before he could press further, her emotions tangled in a way she hadn't anticipated. The tension between them evaporated during a party they attended together. Laughter and music filled the space as they slipped into a quieter room, the energy between them electric. Harry pulled her close, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was deep and lingering. Milena kissed him back, her fingers threading through his hair as the intensity between them grew. But then something shifted. Her muscles tensed, her body betraying her control. She pulled away, stumbling back as a sharp pain surged through her. Harry's expression shifted to alarm as Milena's form twisted. Her teeth elongated, her eyes darkened, and her skin turned pale and cold. Before either could fully comprehend what was happening, Milena lunged at him, her instincts overtaking her reason. Harry reacted in an instant, dodging her attack with a speed she hadn't expected. He bolted from the room, his movements unnaturally swift. By the time Milena regained her composure and transformed back, he was gone. Desperation drove her to his house later that night, but it was empty. The lights were off, the door locked, and there was no trace of him anywhere. She stood on the porch for a moment, her breath uneven as she replayed the events in her mind. As she walked back to her own home, the shadows of the forest seemed darker than usual. A low growl interrupted the silence, followed by another. Milena froze, her sharp senses alert. From the trees emerged a pack of wolves, their eyes gleaming in the moonlight. She took a step back, realization dawning on her. Harry wasn't just fast. He was something else entirely. She knew she couldn't take on the wolves alone. Without hesitation, she turned and sprinted into the darkness, her mind racing as fast as her feet. For the first time in a long while, Milena felt hunted. Milena's steps faltered as she approached what used to be her sanctuary. Her house stood in ruins, the windows shattered, the door hanging loosely on its hinges, and deep claw marks gouged into the walls. Inside, her belongings were scattered, broken as if torn apart by rage. She clenched her fists, her jaw tightening. This wasn't an accident. It was a message. Her thoughts raced back to Harry, the werewolf. She could still see his sharp eyes and feel the weight of his presence. He was behind this. She was sure of it. Standing amidst the wreckage, she felt a surge of anger so fierce it burned away her sadness. She'd been forced to run, to abandon her life, and now she'd lost her home. Harry had made this personal. Milena left the destroyed house and drove for hours, the anger fueling her until she reached her father's home. The small, weathered house sat at the edge of a quiet town, its exterior unchanged since her childhood. Inside, the faint smell of pine wood greeted her, a comforting contrast to the chaos she'd left behind. Her father, a tall, weathered man with graying hair, looked up from his chair as she entered. His sharp eyes immediately registered the tension in her movements. "I'm back," she said simply, her voice tight. "Milena," he said, standing. "What happened?" She sat across from him, her gaze fixed on the floor. "I'm still searching for the man who killed Mom. I think I found him." Her father's expression darkened. "What do you mean?" "I met a man named Harry," she said slowly. "At first, I didn't think it was him. I killed another man named Harry few weeks ago, but he wasn't a werewolf. This one, he is. He's strong. Too strong. He attacked me with his pack. I had to run." Her father's grip tightened on the arm of his chair. "Milena, listen to me. Your mother's killer is a werewolf. His name is Harry, and he's in this state. If you've found him, you know what you have to do." "I can't do it alone," she admitted, her voice quieter now. "He's too powerful, but I've already started working on it. I've been tracking men named Harry. I watch them, learn their routines, and then—" She paused, her gaze cold. "I get close enough to strike." Her father studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he stood and walked to the small table by the fireplace, where a framed photograph of Milena's mother rested. "You have your mother's strength," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "But this Harry the werewolf won't fall easily. You'll need help." He turned back to her. "I'll call Ben. He's been training for years. He'll stand by your side." Milena's lips twitched in a faint smile. "Ben? Your brother's son? I haven't seen him in years." "He's been preparing for this life," her father said firmly. "He's strong, smart, and loyal. He'll be here tomorrow." Milena didn't argue. She trusted her father's judgment, and if Ben was as capable as he claimed, she could use the help. The following evening, Milena sat on the porch, watching the sunset stain the sky in shades of orange and pink. A car pulled up to the driveway, and a tall, muscular man stepped out. His sharp features and confident stride immediately reminded her of her father's side of the family. "Milena," Ben said, his voice steady as he approached. "Ben," she replied, standing to meet him. He offered a small smile, though his dark eyes carried a seriousness that matched her own. "Your father told me everything. You're hunting a werewolf named Harry." She nodded, her voice steady. "He killed my mother." Ben's expression hardened. "Then we'll make him pay." Over the next few days, Milena and Ben worked together, their plan taking shape. She shared everything she'd learned about Harry's routine, the times he visited the restaurant, the places he frequented, and the pack that seemed to follow him. Ben listened carefully, his questions sharp and precise. His experience as a tracker became clear as he pieced together strategies and contingencies. As they prepared, Milena felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't alone anymore, and this time, she wouldn't run. This time, she'd finish what she started, and Harry wouldn't see it coming. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale glow over the quiet streets of the city where Harry lived. Milena and Ben parked their car in a secluded alley, their expressions tense as they finalized their plan. "He's usually alone around this time," Milena whispered, adjusting the dagger concealed at her side. "We have to strike fast before his pack gets wind of us." Ben, standing tall and resolute, glanced at her. "We'll be fine. Stick to the plan, and don't let him get too close." They moved in silence, their steps careful and deliberate as they approached Harry's usual path near the outskirts of the city. The air carried the faint scent of wet earth and distant pine, mingling with the quiet hum of the night. And then they saw him. Harry stood beneath a streetlight, his muscular frame relaxed, his sharp features illuminated by the soft glow. He seemed unaware, his gaze distant as he leaned against a fence. Milena gave Ben a quick glance, and they crept closer. When they were within range, Milena pulled out her dagger, her breath steady. "Now!" she hissed. Ben surged forward, swinging a silver-edged blade toward Harry. But Harry moved with the speed and precision of a predator. He ducked, the blade slicing harmlessly through the air, and turned to face them, his eyes gleaming with something between amusement and annoyance. "Milena," Harry said, his voice calm yet sharp. "I had a feeling you'd come back." Before Milena could respond, Ben charged again, his strikes relentless. Harry dodged each blow with ease, his movements fluid and almost taunting. "You're going to have to try harder than that," Harry said, catching Ben's wrist mid-swing and twisting it sharply. Ben cried out, dropping his blade as Harry flung him to the side like a rag doll. Milena wasted no time. She lunged at Harry, her dagger aimed for his chest, but Harry grabbed her arm mid-strike, his grip ironclad. "Really?" he said, tilting his head. "You think this will work?" With a swift motion, he disarmed her, the dagger clattering to the ground. Before she could react, he shoved her backward. She stumbled, hitting the ground hard. Ben recovered and rushed at Harry again, this time aiming for his legs. But Harry anticipated the move. With a brutal kick, he sent Ben sprawling onto the pavement, the sound of impact echoing through the empty street. Milena pushed herself up, her body aching, but her resolve unshaken. She grabbed a broken piece of wood from the ground and charged at Harry, her movements driven by desperation. Harry caught the makeshift weapon effortlessly, snapping it in half and tossing the pieces aside. His gaze bore into hers, and for the first time, she saw the full force of his power. "You're wasting your time," Harry said, his voice low but firm. "Why are you so determined to kill me?" Milena's chest heaved as she glared at him. "You killed my mother." For a moment, Harry's expression froze. Then, to her shock, he laughed, a deep, mocking sound that made her blood boil. "Your mother?" he said, shaking his head. "And you're certain it was me?" "You know what you did," she spat. Harry stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "You should have started with that instead of trying to kill me." Milena braced herself for the final blow, but instead, Harry turned and began walking away. "Kill me now!" she shouted after him, her voice trembling with rage. "Or one day, I'll kill you." Harry stopped and looked back at her, his eyes unreadable. "If you think I'm your mother's killer, you're mistaken. But believe what you want." He walked away, disappearing into the shadows, leaving Milena and Ben alive. Back at her father's house, the disappointment was palpable. Her father paced the room, his hands clenched into fists. "You had one job," he said, his voice sharp, "and you failed." "He's too strong," Ben interjected. "We need more people, better preparation." Her father pointed a finger at him. "Then get more people." Milena leaned back in her chair as twilight seeped through the window of her father's house, painting the room in muted hues of orange and gray. She stared at the ceiling, exhaustion tugging at her, but her thoughts remained restless. The encounter with Harry replayed in her mind like a vivid nightmare. She didn't understand his actions, or her own emotions. As evening settled in, Ben appeared at her door, his expression serious. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Without a word, Milena stood, grabbed her coat, and followed him outside. The air was cool and crisp, a faint breeze carrying the scent of distant pines. They walked in silence for a while, the sound of their footsteps crunching against the gravel path filling the void. Ben finally spoke. "I've been thinking about what happened. he began, his tone cautious. And I can't shake the feeling that we're wrong about Harry. Milena stopped, her brow furrowing. What are you saying? Ben hesitated, glancing at the ground before meeting her gaze. If he was the one who killed your mother, he wouldn't have let us live. Think about it. He's powerful enough to wipe us out. He had every chance, but he didn't. Milena crossed her arms, her voice steady but laced with defiance. You're saying it's someone else? Another Harry? It's possible, Ben replied. We might have been chasing the wrong target all along. Milena's jaw tightened. No, you're wrong. Harry let us live because he loves me. That's the only reason. Ben raised an eyebrow, his skepticism clear. You really believe that? Love doesn't stop a killer. Milena turned away, her gaze fixed on the darkening horizon. This time, it did. Ben sighed, but didn't argue further. They walked back toward the house, the weight of unanswered questions lingering between them. The phone rang in the stillness of the evening, its sharp tone breaking Milena's concentration. She hesitated before picking it up, her hand tightening around the receiver when she saw the name on the screen. Harry. What do you want? Milena's voice was curt, but her tone carried a slight tremor. Milena, Harry began, his tone firm yet laced with an unfamiliar vulnerability. I didn't kill your mother. I swear to you. I have no idea what's going on or why you're trying to kill me. Milena's expression hardened, though her voice softened, slipping into calculated deceit. I don't know, Harry. I've been wrong before. Maybe I'm wrong now. But this isn't easy for me. There was a pause on the other end, a faint sigh audible through the line. Milena, I love you. I would never harm you or anyone you care about. You have to believe me. Milena forced a bittersweet laugh, weaving in the false sincerity she needed. I miss you, Harry. I miss what we had. She allowed her voice to falter slightly, setting the bait. Maybe we could meet to talk. There was hesitation from Harry, but only for a moment. When and where? Milena suppressed a triumphant smirk. Like before. Just us. I need to see you. They met in a quiet, dimly lit park, the same place where their connection had first begun. Milena wore a flowing, elegant dress that danced lightly with the breeze, her demeanor calm but her mind racing. When Harry arrived, he walked toward her with a mixture of caution and longing in his eyes. As he stopped in front of her, his gaze softened. I'm glad you called me. Before she could reply, Harry leaned in and kissed her, his hands brushing against her arms. His lips lingered on hers, and Milena felt an involuntary shiver, not of fear, but something far more complicated. I mean it, Milena, he murmured as he pulled back, his voice barely above a whisper. I love you. Whatever's happening, I just want to fix it. I don't want to lose you. Milena placed a hand on his chest, pretending to be lost in the moment. I believe you, Harry, she whispered. Her words felt heavy in her mouth, but her act was flawless. I just need time to sort through everything. Later that night, Milena shared the meeting with Ben and their father, laying out her plan with meticulous precision. I told him I believed him, she explained, her voice steady as she paced the room. He trusts me now. We'll use that. Ben leaned back in his chair, his expression skeptical. And he agreed to come here? To meet Dad? Yes, Milena said firmly. He thinks I want him to ask for my hand in marriage. He'll come willingly. Their father, seated at the head of the table, folded his arms. His weathered face showed no trace of doubt. This is our chance, he said. Make no mistake. If he's guilty, we end this. The following day, Harry sat in his home, his mind clouded with anticipation and worry. His closest friends, all werewolves like him, sat around him, their concern palpable. "You can't trust her," one of them warned, his sharp eyes narrowing. "It's a trap, Harry. She's already tried to kill you once." "She said she believes me," Harry countered, his voice resolute. "And you're willing to stake your life on that?" Another friend interjected, his tone harsh. "Melena's intentions aren't pure. You know this." Harry stood, his tall frame imposing against the dim light of the room. "I love her," he said simply. "If I don't trust her now, there's no future for us. I have to do this." When Harry arrived at Melena's father's house, the atmosphere was deceptively warm. The family greeted him with polite smiles and a carefully staged sense of welcome. "Harry, it's good to meet you," Melena's father said, extending a hand. His grip was firm, his eyes scanning Harry with quiet scrutiny. "It's an honor, sir," Harry replied, his tone sincere. "I care deeply for Melena, and I want to make things right." Melena stood nearby, her hands clasped in front of her. Her smile was radiant, her posture relaxed, but her mind was already calculating her next move. As the evening wore on, small talk flowed easily. Harry seemed oblivious to the tension beneath the surface, lulled by Melena's charm and the illusion of acceptance. What he didn't see, however, were the fleeting glances between Ben and Melena, the subtle movements of Melena's father as he discreetly ensured every door was locked. The trap was set, and Harry was already ensnared. Melena watched as Harry approached the well, his confident stride and broad shoulders betraying no sign of suspicion. Her father and Ben stood behind her, poised like hunters closing in on their prey. She gripped the bucket's rope, her focus narrowing on the man who was about to meet his end. Harry's hands reached for the bucket, but something about them made her pause. They were rougher, broader than she remembered. A flicker of doubt flashed in her mind, but before she could piece it together, her father stepped forward, his hand ready to shove Harry into the well. It was only then that Melena fully registered the difference. This wasn't Harry. Her mouth opened to speak, but the moment shattered in chaos. Her father's shove missed the target and hit her instead. Melena stumbled, her feet slipping on the damp ground. The world blurred as the edges of the well loomed dangerously close. Her breath hitched, the ground spinning beneath her. But then, a firm grip caught her wrist, pulling her back from the brink. Her rescuer wasn't Harry. It was the man pretending to be him. He steadied her and muttered, "Careful." Melena staggered, disoriented. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice cracking. The man released her and stepped back, his sharp eyes scanning the area. "Luke," he said shortly. "Harry's friend." Before she could process his words, a growl echoed from behind her. She spun around to see her father's form shifting grotesquely, his human frame morphing into the hulking shape of a werewolf. His snarling face turned toward her, his sharp claws glinting in the sunlight. "You've betrayed me," he growled, his voice guttural and raw. Melena's pulse quickened as the realization crashed over her. Her father, the man who had raised her, who she had trusted implicitly, was the true monster. Her father lunged at her, but Harry appeared, flanked by his pack. His transformation was swift, his body stretching and contorting until he stood in his wolf form, his glowing eyes locked on her father. "Stay away from her," Harry snarled, his voice commanding. Luke shifted as well, his muscles rippling as his wolf form emerged. Together with Harry's pack, they charged at her father, clashing in a whirlwind of claws and teeth. The fight was brutal. Melena could only watch, her body frozen as her world crumbled around her. Harry and his pack fought with precision and strength, their movements a choreographed symphony of ferocity. Her father fought with a desperate, unrelenting rage, but he was no match for the combined force of Harry's allies. When it was over, her father lay defeated, his once dominating presence reduced to a lifeless heap. Harry shifted back to his human form, his chest heaving as he turned to face her. "Malena," he said, his voice steady, despite the exhaustion etched into his features. She stepped forward, her legs trembling beneath her. "What was wrong with my father?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ben, who had stayed on the sidelines during the fight, stepped forward. "I heard him talking to one of his friends," he admitted, his voice thick with regret. "He killed your mother, Malena. He took her powers to make himself stronger, and he planned to do the same to you." The words hit her like a physical blow, leaving her breathless. She turned to Harry, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "You knew?" Harry nodded once, his expression grave. "Ben told me this morning. We didn't have time to explain. We needed to act fast." Malena sank to her knees, the weight of betrayal and guilt crushing her. "You saved me," she said softly, looking up at Harry. He crouched down, his gaze meeting hers. "I would never hurt you, Malena. I love you." Her breath hitched, the sincerity in his eyes cutting through her like a blade. She felt the full force of her actions, the depth of her mistake. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "For everything. For trying to kill you. For doubting you. I didn't deserve your love." Harry stood, his posture tense. "You didn't," he said quietly, his words like a dagger to her heart. "But I gave it to you anyway." Tears streamed down her face as she reached out for him, but he stepped back, his expression pained. "I forgave you the moment you spared me the first time," he said. "But I can't do this anymore." "Harry, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "Can we still marry? Can we start over?" For a moment, he hesitated. His eyes searched hers, as if looking for the woman he once believed in, but the hurt ran too deep, the trust too fractured. "I can't," he said simply, his voice heavy with finality. He turned and began to walk away, his steps slow but deliberate. Ben called after him, his voice desperate. "Harry, wait! She's sorry. She knows now." Harry stopped but didn't turn around. "It's not about knowing," he said. "It's about what's been broken. And I can't fix this." Malena watched him leave, her chest tight with regret and longing. She wanted to run after him, to pull him back, but her legs wouldn't move. The weight of her choices anchored her in place, forcing her to confront the reality of what she had lost. Harry disappeared into the distance, his figure fading into the horizon. Malena stood in silence, the echoes of his love and the sting of his departure lingering in the air. She wiped her tears, her heart heavy with the knowledge that she had destroyed the one thing she truly cared about, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly alone. Malena spent the entire night tossing and turning, consumed by the chaos of her shattered world. Her father, who she had trusted blindly, was gone, exposed as the villain who had killed her mother. And Harry, the man who had loved her despite everything, had walked away, unable to forgive her betrayal. By dawn, she decided she couldn't leave things as they were. She had to find Harry, even if it meant groveling or chasing him to the ends of the earth. With her determination stealing her shaky resolve, she packed a bag and left for the city where Harry lived. She searched everywhere, his usual haunts, the restaurant where they'd first met, the streets where she thought he might wander. But Harry was nowhere to be found. Exhausted and desperate, she returned to the cafe where she had worked. The faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the sound of quiet chatter brought memories rushing back. This was where it had all begun. Milena sat at their usual table, running her fingers along the edges of the menu, imagining Harry sitting across from her with that faint, mischievous smile. But hours passed, and he didn't show up. Disheartened, she left, walking aimlessly through the streets. That's when she saw him. Harry was sitting on a cemented bench beneath a large oak tree, staring into the distance. His face was unreadable, a mask of calm that barely concealed the storm beneath. Milena hesitated, her breath hitching as she summoned the courage to approach. "Harry," she called softly, stepping closer. He glanced up briefly, but didn't respond. Milena sat beside him, the bench cool against her skin. "Do you remember the first time we kissed?" she asked, her voice trembling with both hope and fear. "It was here, under this tree. You were teasing me about how I spilled coffee on a customer, and Harry cut her off with a pointed look. "What do you want, Milena?" His tone was flat, devoid of warmth. She faltered, but pressed on. "I'm sorry. I know I hurt you, and I don't deserve your forgiveness, but—" "You're right," Harry interrupted, standing abruptly. "You don't." She stood as well, desperation flaring in her chest. "Harry, please. I'll do anything to make this right. I'll prove to you that I've changed." Harry's gaze was sharp as he stared at her. "Do you even understand what you're asking? You betrayed me, Milena. You tried to kill me. You don't just come back from that with an apology and a few tears." "I didn't know what to believe," she cried, her voice breaking. "I thought you killed my mother. I was wrong and I hate myself for it. But I love you, Harry. I always have." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Pain, perhaps, or the memory of what they'd once shared. But then he turned and walked away. "Harry, please," Milena called after him. But he didn't stop. Milena wasn't ready to give up. She followed him to his house, waiting outside until nightfall. When Harry finally returned, her heart sank. He wasn't alone. A beautiful woman walked beside him, her hand resting casually in his. They were laughing softly, their connection apparent. Milena froze, a sharp ache slicing through her. She had never considered the possibility that Harry might move on so quickly. As they reached his doorstep, she stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Harry, please, can we talk?" Harry turned, his expression unreadable. The woman glanced between them but said nothing. "Milena, this isn't a good time," Harry said coolly. She ignored his dismissal. "I need to explain myself. I know I hurt you, but You think words can fix this?" His voice was suddenly hard, anger bubbling to the surface. "I'll do anything," Milena said, her voice cracking. "Tell me what I need to do." Harry's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Anything? Are you sure about that?" "Yes," she whispered, swallowing her pride. He studied her for a long moment before gesturing to the woman beside him. "This is Anna. I'm going to sleep with her tonight. Does that bother you?" Milena flinched as if she'd been slapped. "What?" "You heard me," Harry said, his voice cold. "You've hurt me more than anyone ever has. You've lied, you've betrayed me, and now you want forgiveness? Why should I give it to you when you've done nothing to earn it?" Tears streamed down Milena's face, but she refused to back down. "I'll wait here," she said hoarsely, her voice shaking. "If that's what you need to do, I'll wait, but I'm not giving up on us." Harry's expression faltered for a moment, but then he clenched his jaw. "Maybe you should come inside and watch. It's only fair, considering what you've done." Milena stared at him, horrified. "No, I can't." Her voice broke. If you want to punish me, fine. But don't do this. Please. Harry's anger wavered, replaced by something softer, confusion perhaps, or regret. He sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. Go home, Milena. Just go. She didn't move. I'm not leaving. Anna, who had remained silent until now, gently touched Harry's arm. I think she's had enough, she said softly. Harry stared at Milena for a long moment before shaking his head. You don't get it, do you? I can't trust you, Milena. Not after what you've done. Milena stepped closer, her voice raw. Then let me earn it back. I'll wait as long as it takes. Milena sat outside Harry's house as dawn broke, her emotions raw and her body aching from the long, cold night. She wasn't sure how much more rejection she could endure, but her determination to fix things with Harry outweighed her fear. Just as she was about to leave, the door creaked open, and Anna stepped out. Milena tensed, unsure of what to expect. Anna approached her, her expression warm but tinged with something unreadable. Milena, Anna began softly, sitting down beside her on the steps. Milena looked up, her eyes red from crying. I'm sorry if I've caused trouble between you and Harry. I didn't know he was seeing someone else. Anna chuckled lightly, catching Milena off guard. He's not, Milena. I'm his sister. Milena's heart stopped. What? Anna nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. He's been trying to hurt you emotionally, to make you feel the pain he felt when you betrayed him. But Milena, he loves you. He's always loved you. The words hit Milena like a wave, and she felt tears spilling down her cheeks again, this time out of relief. She covered her mouth with her hands, unable to believe what she was hearing. Harry loves me, she whispered. Anna nodded. Yes, Milena. He's just hurt. What you did, trying to kill him, it broke him. But he's still holding on to that love for you. He's just too stubborn to admit it right now. Milena let out a shaky laugh, tears streaming down her face. I don't deserve him. I don't deserve any of this kindness from you, Anna, after everything I've done. Anna placed a hand on Milena's shoulder. Listen to me. You made mistakes, yes, but it wasn't entirely your fault. You were manipulated by your father, confused by everything going on around you. I've heard the full story, and I know your heart was in the right place, even if your actions weren't. Milena looked at Anna, gratitude filling her chest. Thank you for understanding, and for not hating me. Anna smiled warmly. It's impossible to hate someone who loves my brother as much as you do. Overcome with emotion, Milena threw her arms around Anna, pulling her into a tight hug. Thank you, she whispered. Anna hugged her back, then pulled away, her tone lightening. But if you hurt him again, I won't be so forgiving. Milena laughed through her tears, nodding. I won't, I promise. The door opened again, and this time it was Harry who stepped out. His gaze immediately locked on Milena, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Harry, Anna said, her tone encouraging. Don't keep her waiting. Harry walked slowly down the steps, his expression guarded but less cold than before. He stopped a few feet from Milena, studying her as if searching for something. Milena, he began, his voice softer than it had been in days. I've been angry, hurt, and I thought I'd never be able to trust you again. But... He hesitated, his eyes flicking to Anna, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. But? Milena prompted, her heart in her throat. Harry took a deep breath. But I realized something. No matter how much I tried to push you away, no matter how much I wanted to stop loving you, I couldn't. Tears welled up in Melena's eyes again as she stepped closer. "Harry." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple ring. "I don't want to keep running from this, from us. Melena, will you marry me?" Melena's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. She stared at him, stunned, before a radiant smile broke across her face. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling with joy. "Yes, I'll marry you." Harry slid the ring onto her finger, his hands steady despite the emotions swirling between them. Melena flung her arms around his neck, pulling him into a deep, heartfelt kiss. It wasn't just a kiss of love, it was a kiss of forgiveness, of promises to be better, and of a future they would build together. As they pulled apart, Harry cupped her face in his hands, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and vulnerability. "Melena, I need to say this. What you did, it hurt me more than anything I've ever experienced. But I know now that it wasn't just you. Your father manipulated you, and I can't hold that against you forever." Melena nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I was wrong, Harry. I let my fears and confusion cloud my judgment, but I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you, if you'll let me." Harry smiled faintly. "We'll take it one step at a time. Together." Anna cleared her throat, drawing their attention. "Well, now that the dramatic part is over, how about we celebrate? There's a bar nearby, and I think we all could use a drink." Harry and Melena exchanged a glance before laughing. "That sounds perfect," Melena said, her voice lighter than it had been in days. The three of them walked together, a sense of peace settling over them. Melena slipped her hand into Harry's, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt hope. A new beginning. The bar was lively, filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses. As they sat together, Harry and Melena couldn't help but steal glances at each other, the weight of their past mistakes slowly lifting. "You know," Anna said, raising her glass, "this calls for a toast, to second chances and to love." Harry and Melena clinked their glasses against hers, smiling. As the night wore on, Melena felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just Harry's fiancée. She was someone who would fight for their love, no matter what challenges came their way. And with Harry, Anna, and even Ben by her side, she knew they could face anything together. In that moment, surrounded by laughter and love, Melena realized she had found her place, not just in Harry's life, but in a future where they could both heal, grow, and love without fear. And for the first time in a long time, everything felt right.